Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be going over 5 things that the Media Molecule music tutorials don't teach you, that I've either stumbled across on my own or I found somebody else talking about it. And these things are really helpful when making music, so I'm going to go ahead and go through them one by one. Now I have 5 tips. I do have one bonus tip that's going to be at the end, so make sure you stick around to the end to see all the tips. Now the first tip is that you can make your own instruments, not just by playing something through a microphone and adjusting it that way, but you can make them electronically too. Now there are 2 ways we could do this. We can either get out an instrument. So for example, if we got out this electric bass guitar, we could come into this slice mapper view and delete all of these. These are what actually make the bass sound. And if we got rid of all of these, then we would have an empty instrument that doesn't actually have any musical information in it. So if you perform on here, nothing happens. But if we come into this oscillator page, we can use this mix mode. I'll just go ahead and turn this up. And let me move this home octave up a little bit. And now we can see that when we play on here, we get some notes. Now all these effect fields are still here. So if you didn't want that, you could delete them. Or another way to make this is you go into tools and you can record like a little sound thing for like half a second, and then just come in here and delete that and set this to instrument, and now we have an instrument that we can make music with. Alright, so the next tip is that you can fake delay with notes. So we could add some sort of delay in here, right? So if you add delay, you would go into the sound effects and we could add delay here, so that when you play a note, it plays it a couple times, right? And that could be really great if that delay time matched our tempo, right? So here's our tempo. So that's pretty close. But if our tempo was set to something else, that delay might not sound as good, right? So it might, but it might not. And so there's an easy way to fake that. So let's say you have like a phrase that's like, and you want that last note to have a bunch of delay. There are 2 ways we can do this. So let's go ahead and record it. So here's our phrase. So one thing we could do to add delay is if you highlight a note, then switch back to the freeform view, which a shortcut is if you hold L1, you can press touchpad and it'll switch this over. We can see that if we're not in perform mode, we can actually move these selected notes around, right? So this is the note we want. So we can actually move it around. So let's say we move it down here. And now we could add an effect field with delay. So one of these is probably here. Here, 70%. Right? But let's say you wanted that delay to be in time. How could we do that? One easy way is to clone this like that. And so we take all of these clones and we make them smaller by holding down on the D-pad, which decreases their volume. And we just make them smaller and smaller. And so now we can hear this. You could actually set the timing of how these work here, right? So I'll move these in, and now these are kind of on a more triplet bass. Alright, and that leads us perfectly into the next tip, which is how to change rhythms to be something that doesn't fit to the grid snap. We see we have quarter notes, eighth notes, sextuplets, sixteenths, right? So we have things that are divisible by 4 and 3, but we don't have anything like in 5 or 7, for example. So if we wanted to play with quintuplets, meaning there are 5 notes per beat, we could see we could lay it out so there'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is like a drum beat here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? But we can hear that this doesn't fit with the tempo, right? So if I play the metronome, we can hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, right? That doesn't sound right. So what we can do is, this is 5 measures of this. If I hold L1 at the end of this thing, we can stretch it out or we can make it smaller. So if I have this span over 4 measures, now the bass and the snare land on the downbeat according to the metronome, and we have 5 hi-hats in between. So we can hear that here. One, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is a great way to use more odd subdivisions of notes. All right, the next tip is something that I don't think is that well known. Let's say we're currently using what? This sound that we made. Right? Now something that's really neat is you can take other instruments and put them inside of instruments. So let's say we really like this triangle-like thing. We could put this in here. Now it should be noted that this comes with an outer zone, which is kind of cool because you can fade between the sounds. So we can see if we play within here, we can kind of fade between the instrument that we've made and this instrument. Right, so something we could do is we could take all the notes that we've played, except we'll take all of these that we've highlighted here and we'll move them so that they're inside of the zone here, right? Right, and so now we have 2 instruments in one. Okay, tip number 5 is how we can do key changes programmatically. So let's go ahead and get rid of this stuff here. And what I'm going to do is I will just grab a little musical clip somewhere. Just get rid of that. Okay, so here is this galaxy thing that Media Molecule made. Okay, so I'm actually just going to use those first 4 bars here. So let's say we have like a boss fight going on, right? So we'll go ahead and loop this. We can see that it'll play these first 4 bars over and over and over again. Right? But after a while that would start to feel a little stale. But you may not want to add more layers on top of it because maybe you don't want to detract from the gameplay. So one thing you could do is you can change the key every time it repeats, and that'll kind of make things a little bit more interesting. So to do this, I'll get out a keyframe and I'm going to grab all of these things in here and I'm going to pitch them up an entire octave like that. Okay, great. Now every time this thing finishes, we're going to want to change the key. How can we do this? We can get out a counter, and if we set this to a target value of 12, and every time this pulses, it increases, we can send the count progress into this, and that will change the key every time the counter goes up. Right, so that sounds pretty cool. You may not want it to climb forever though, so let's talk about a different way we could set this up. We'll get one more counter out. So let's say we want it to go up maybe twice and then go back down twice, right? And it'll repeat like that over and over again. So one thing we could do is we can get out a couple switches here. One will be for the positive, and the other one will be for the negative. And let's see, when this is full, then we will turn this on. And when it's not full is when we'll turn on the other one. Right, so these can just go into here like that. Now this will also increase this counter. Okay, and then we need to reset this counter when this thing goes back to 0. So when it's completely empty. So if this is equal to 0, then we'll reset this counter. So we can see that it's currently not changing the key. And then it went up a step. And I'll go up one more half step. Right? And since this filled, it went back down a half step, and it'll do it again. Right? And now we're back to the beginning. And now my last tip, my final tip here, it's a little bonus tip, is how we can make our loops sound a little bit more varied so that it doesn't just sound like the same thing over and over again. Obviously key changes can help with that, but so can multiple different tracks. So one thing I like to do is for things like this, I'm going to put them in their own timeline. Okay? So one thing that we could do this for is drums, for example. So I'll get out some drums. So I'm just going to record something really quick. I'm going to get out one for just some hi-hats. I'll just pencil these in. Just going to put these, I'm just going to put those on the upbeats there so we can hear this is a fairly mild sounding drum beat. Say as the song progresses, we want this to get more intense. So I'll get another one out. Okay. So we have these three kind of groupings here. That's how I'm thinking about them anyways. There's like three separate groupings. The way we could have this work is we'll have a microchip in here. So in this microchip, we'll have a node. And the on-end trigger will come into here. And so this will go into a selector next port, and there will be 3 of them. Okay? Good. Alright, so this, if we wanted to, we could even put these in their own timelines. So let's go ahead and do that too. So each of these will power one of these timelines, and every time the end of the thing comes around, it will increase that. So I'll just shorten this so we can hear it. So here's our mild drum track. Then it levels up. So using the same technique, we can do this with a bunch of different instruments, not just with the drums, but we could do it with different layers, for example. And so I've made something here that kind of uses a lot of these topics here. So there's kind of a lot to look at, but it's really just 16 bars, right? And so I have a bunch of instruments that aren't on by default. Right, so here I have some guitars that aren't on, I have some bass that's not on, this melody is not on, this piano, this pad is not on. Pretty much the only thing on is this guitar and one of these drum sets. Right, and so in here I have this selector powering a bunch of these instruments, and over in here, every time the timeline ends, this goes into a switch which increases this by 2. So this brings it up a whole step into this thing which pitches everything up an octave, right? So it pitches all the instruments that have notes in them up an octave, but we're using the counter to make it not a full octave. The one other thing I have in here at the very beginning is this keyframe, which just moves this playhead to the center. So that way it starts at the center, and up here is a keyframe which turns the power to the entire thing off, so it'll actually end in the center as well. So I'll let this play, and hopefully you can see how certain things are turning on and off, how the drum tracks are changing, and how the key change kind of makes it sound a little bit better. Alright, so hopefully that was enjoyable. I know this video is a little bit different for me, but if you enjoyed it, please let me know. I'd love to hear your feedback on whether you found this kind of thing enjoyable or not. I hope maybe you've learned something that you didn't know already. If you have, go ahead and leave me a comment down below. If I missed anything, other tips that you want to leave, go ahead and leave a comment about that too. And of course, if you enjoyed it, it'd mean a lot to me if you hit the thumbs up. And if you're new and you want to see more tutorials, feel free to subscribe. I got a lot of cool stuff coming out. I hope everyone's doing well and staying safe. I'll see you next time.